Today I want to talk to you about Today I want to talk to you about a few concepts pertaining to walking a bass line. So first let's talk about what walking a bass line actually is. At its core, walking a bass line is when the bass player outlines the harmony in the music by using either scales associated with that chord or arpeggios of that chord. Oftentimes they're going at the beat of the music, which is why it's called a walk. You know, you're just kind of walking along with the beat as a bass player. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Something that simple. Now obviously, you know, the topic gets a lot deeper than that, but really at the very center of it, that's all it is. You're just outlining the harmony with your bass notes. I've done a really simple example for tap theory before with my rendition of the Pink Panther theme by Henry Mancini. That's going back and forth between a G minor and an E flat 7 chord, and I walk using just a couple of arpeggios. For G minor, and then E flat 7. All of those notes fall squarely within the two arpeggios associated with those chords. You don't just have to use arpeggios though, you can also use chord scales, or scales that are associated with the chords. So in this progression I'm going from A minor chord to a D minor chord, back to an A minor chord, and then to an E7 chord. And I'm going to use notes from the A minor scale on the A minor chords, and notes from the D minor scale on the D minor chord, and then I'm going to end with an E7 arpeggio. You can see I'm going 1, 2, flat 3, 5, all notes in the A minor scale. I'm coming back down to D minor, 1, 2, flat 3, 4 of D minor, and then 1, flat 7, 5, 4 of A minor, and then I'm just doing an E7 arpeggio. Back to A. And when you're doing that, you're going to want to use strong notes on strong beats. And the strongest beat in a bar of 4/4 is the downbeat, the 1. And the second strongest is the 3. And so you're going to want to place notes that are in the chord on beats 1 and 3. You know, so if I'm walking an A minor bass line out of the A minor scale, here's my A minor scale. I'm going to probably want to do something like this. Let's say I'm heading to D minor. And what I'm doing here is I'm doing A on beat 1, and then beat 2 is B, that's a nice weak beat. Beat 3 is C, which is another chord tone. And then I'm using a passing tone, chromatic step up to D minor to get to my destination. And of course the last core concept of basic walking bass is smoothly connecting all of your phrases, right? Or voice leading. And as we talked about in the basics of voice leading video, generally good voice leading means that it's as little motion as possible. You want to try and keep everything pretty stepwise. As the bass, you're going to have a little bit more leniency. Octaves, you can kind of get away with doing octaves. They kind of function as the same thing in the bass in a way. And you can do, you can drop like a fifth. You know, if it's like a 5-to-1, like an E7 chord to an A, that's not going to sound too bad either. But, if you take a look at, this example that I'm about to play, which is a pathway through the A section of Fly Me to the Moon, then you'll see what I'm doing is I'm trying to keep everything very tight, especially on the chord transitions. I'm trying to keep my voice leading very tight, where on beat 4 of one chord into beat 1 of the next chord, I'm trying to never go more than 2 frets away, or try and keeping everything in kind of a half step, stepwise motion with passing tones. You can see, as I was going from each chord, I'm trying to keep everything in kind of stepwise motion, and never really going more than a fifth away from the previous note, unless it's a chord tone, right? So going from A minor with a passing tone to D on a strong beat. Here's my fifth, and then a passing tone down to G, arpeggio, passing tone to C, then C major scale to F, still in key, arpeggio on B, and then E7. I'm using the octatonic scale here, so now I'm using scale tones. A minor, and then A7, I'm using the C sharp as a chord tone, but keeping everything moving forward, so rather than going A, C sharp, it'd be kind of lame to repeat that A. I'm just going to the next chord tone available, A7, and here's a chromatic approach tone to D. Now again, this stuff gets really, really deep. And as a bass player who's only handling a single voice in an ensemble, that's not so bad to handle all that stuff at once. But as a stick player who also has to maybe play chords, maybe play a melody, who knows, that's a lot. So what can we do to simplify this? Well, I came up with this idea that I like to call cell bass, after wildly misunderstanding an explanation of Steve Adelson's compass bass from Steve himself while I was taking lessons with him. And I remember coming back to his classroom the next week and being like, "Oh, is this it?" And he was like, "Not really, but if it works for you, great." Cell bass is the idea that we can treat the pathways of a walking bass line similarly to how we treat scales and chords. Namely, we can kind of look at it in the same plug-and-play fashion. These are shapes, we treat scales, and we treat chords, and we treat arpeggios as shapes that we fit into our music after memorizing them. And we can do the same thing for bars of walking bass. So for one, arpeggio shapes are super simple to plug in across multiple chords. In this example, I'm going to be going from G minor to C minor to D minor, back to G minor, using all the same shapes. All I did was use the same arpeggio shape for every chord, just 1, flat 3, 5, 7. We can do the exact same thing with chord scale shapes, right? 4 notes out of a scale that is associated with the chord that you're playing. So here I'll be going from C major to F major to G major and back to C. And I'm going to be using the same scale shape for each one of these. And then the last little bit of cell bass is to, once you've got yourself a handful of cells for each chord tonality, maybe an arpeggio or 2 and maybe a chord scale direction or 2, you start to link them together with tight voice leading. Now in this next example, I'm going to play a series of pathways through a 2-5-1 chord progression. That's a very common progression in jazz. Since we'll be in D major, it'll be E minor to A7 to D major 7. And each one of these cells can be, for the chords, can be mixed and matched with any one of them. And if you check out the exercises on my Patreon page, then I urge you to, once you've learned all of these cells, to actually take them and switch them around and see how well they fit together with one another. So each one of those shapes was either a chord scale, again, a scale related to the chord that I'm playing over, or an arpeggio of that chord itself, possibly with some chromatic passing tones to transition between the chords. And I can take each one of those tonalities, once I've memorized those shapes, I can take each one of those shapes and place them appropriately on any chord across the neck. And then, once I've done that, I can start to string them together and memorize larger structures. And you'd be surprised at how well you can get through a lot of different chord progressions with just a handful of cells that you've memorized. So I urge you, head over to my Patreon, check these out, and, try them out, mix and match, and come up with a bunch of your own and try and apply them. And of course, this topic goes miles deep. This is just a couple of methods to start approaching it for the Chapman stick. And with that, I hope this helped. Thanks for watching. Keep exploring.